So while we wait for everyone else to come, we're going to quickly go over what we're going to be talking about today, what we're going to be going over. So today we're going to be going over an introduction to JavaScript and NPM, which is Node Package Manager or Node.js stuff. We're mainly going to be covering the JavaScript portion though, and we'll cover the NPM if we have time. And so this is our schedule. Today is February 16th. That's our meeting. Everything else is pretty standard. Every other week. Based off the calendar, there aren't any like exceptions. So we just keep going every other week until there is an exception. And then so for JavaScript basic syntax, we're going to be going over all of this stuff. We'll get to it later. But also it's important that JavaScript is a bit difficult depending on like your experience, right? And how good you are with programming. It is another programming language, unlike HTML and CSS. Those are more like markup languages. And then also, we're going to be covering like a lot today in a short amount of time. So if you don't understand everything, that's also fine. We'd recommend you guys to just try to like get the main ideas if you can, and if not, like we always have like cheat sheets and stuff that you guys can look at later. So we could be going over let and const control flow, which is the if, for, and while, and arrays, functions, variables, objects / dictionaries, and then callback functions. And then if we have time, we'll get to Node.js and NPM. So talk about what is Node and how to install it, and what are NPM packages, where to find NPM packages, how to install them, and lastly, how to use the NPM packages. So I think I'm going to stop sharing now, and Zenka is going to start with the JavaScript.
Okay, so in case you're wondering, the reason why we're covering JavaScript is because it's used in the browser. So if you are making a website, you're gonna need to use it for the the client side website, right? So in case you're wondering, so like that's Google. So yeah. Okay, if you press, Control-Shift-I, or you just press inspect here, you can find that there's a console in the DevTools tab. And ignore the errors, but in here you can type JavaScript and make things happen with it. And that's basically the programming language that the web uses. And if you go to sources, you can also find some JavaScript files here. The .js file name extension is for JavaScript. So if you press that, you'll find a bunch of code that's been minimized. So minimized means that they don't have white space, like all the unnecessary new lines or spaces are removed. So you can pretty print it, see how it looks like in real life. Yeah, so this is what JavaScript looks like. Yeah, so we can also use it on the server side, and that's what we'll be talking about. That's what we will be talking about in a later lesson, I believe. So, but for now, we just let me just cover the basics of JavaScript. So I'll be using comments for a bit in this lesson. So in JavaScript, you can do / for comment, or I believe you can do the C style long comment. So yeah. So typically you want to use the first style because the second style is suited for long paragraphs of documentation, like for a function or stuff. So let's start with declaring variables. So there are 3 types, and there are 3 ways to create a variable. Or actually, there are 4 ways. And the first way is just not use any declaration at all. Like you just use the Python style, just go for it, like num equals 1, or temp equals hey. And yeah, you don't have to declare anything, but this is not encouraged. And also notice that we have a semicolon here. So unlike Python, well, actually, Python actually allows semicolons, but it's not encouraged. And in JavaScript, there isn't a standard that says whether you should use semicolons or not. It's basically a matter of preference. And of course, in your workspace, in your workplace, you want to follow the conventions set by your company or something like that. But for your personal code, it's just a matter of preference. But you should, it's recommended that you use semicolons because sometimes terrible things happens when you don't use semicolons and something gets screwed up. So yeah, I don't have a specific example, but just use semicolons for JavaScript. And so the encouraged way to create variables is to use let. So let's say let name equals John Smith, semicolon. So this is a block scoped variable. So what this means that this variable will only be available in the block that it's in. So what a block is well, we'll explain later, but just remember that it's block scoped, and it is an encouraged way to create variables. And another way to create variables is var. So let's say var date of birth, var dob, 2000 June 30th. And this is function scoped. So you can access this variable throughout the function. Not encouraged. And well, since this thing is function scoped, the declaration will be moved to the top of the function. And sometimes it causes some unneeded or unwanted mess. So just use let whenever you can. And there's a third type of variable declaration called const. So let's say const high school graduation 2022. So this is similar to let, this is block scoped. And you should use this whenever you can. Okay, so basically the only difference is that the const variables are not actually variables. They're immutable. You can't modify it after you initialize it. So you cannot do this. Okay. And also, so this type of declaration list, well, okay, let me rephrase this. So this line where we create a variable without actually declaring it is discouraged. So there's actually a way to disable it completely in JavaScript, and that's use strict. So use strict has a few more effects, but like disabling unnamed variables is one of them. Oh, shit. So once we use strict, this will be legal. Oh my God. Okay, and that's about it for how to create variables. Okay, let's talk about how to print stuff. Okay, so in JavaScript, there isn't a simple print function. Instead, you should use console.log and say hello world. So as an example, if we use Node, Node is the command line interpreter, for JavaScript. We'll talk about how to install it later. So if you use console.log, yeah, it's the same thing as print in Python. So also let me demonstrate how the how block scoped variables work. So a block is basically a pair of curly braces, and so in Python, this will be in Python. So Python doesn't. I'm not sure if Python has a way to explicitly create blocks, but in the case, just create an example. So oh gosh, latest. So yeah. So say you're inside an if statement. So whatever is outside of this if statement is global scoped. Global means that you're basically well, it's where all the global variables and all the functions lived, right? And all the classes and whatever. And so inside this if statement is a block. So basically an indentation level represents a block. You can think of it that way. And inside here, you're inside a block. And k equals 1. And yeah. So similar to, well, Python probably doesn't, I'm not sure if they use the word block, but inside JavaScript, this is basically a block. And if you use k equals 1 here, actually, let k equals 1 here. So that creates a a scoped variable, and this is limited. The k variable is limited to this block, and you cannot use it outside of the block. So we can print this variable here. And this will be illegal. So we can also access this k inside nested blocks. So this is allowed, but you cannot use it outside of the block. You can use it anywhere inside the block. So let's also create a var variable. So unlike let, var is not limited to the block. It can be used outside of this block. Okay, now let's talk about let's talk about if and else statements. So if and else statements are in JavaScript is pretty similar. This is 2, 1, 2, 4. I'm going to try to go faster. So if and else statements are pretty similar to what we do in Python. So, condition 1. So if you want to do if you want to do complex Boolean expressions, so for and, you use double ampersand. For or, logical or, we use double pipes, so or double vertical bar. In computer science, we call them pipes. Actually, no. Yeah, so you can also, put multiple expressions together. And you can also have an else statement where none of the previous conditions are true. Of course, in real life, you'll have, actual variables, not just, fake constants, but you get the point. Also, Boolean expressions, so logical operators have precedence. So, the double ampersand or the logical and gets evaluated first. So this thing, so, condition 1 and condition 3 gets evaluated first. Okay, this evaluates to true, and it gets short circuited. So since if either side of an OR operation is true, the whole thing is true. So we can short circuit here and do not and not evaluate condition 4. Okay. Since we're short on time, I'm just going to briefly cover. So a while loop is similar to Python. You can have a condition here, and then whatever you want to execute here until the condition becomes false. Also have JavaScript, of course, have arrays. Going to speed run it, and it also has for loops. So it's a bit different than Python. So the for loop in JavaScript is a bit like okay, it's just like a C style for loop. So this is a for loop that originates from the programming language C, in case you don't know. So to iterate over all elements of this array, we use this syntax. So we have an initializer here. We create a index variable I, and we initialize it to 0, and the condition. So the loop will run as long as this condition is true. So as long as I is less than length. So since arrays are 0 indexed, the index can never be equal to length. So that's why it's the condition. And after each iteration ends, we increment the counter, and this will let us, iterate through this array and then print out all of its elements. I believe JavaScript also has the enhanced for loop. I'm not going to cover that here since we're short on time. There are also some other handy array functions, so you can also convert it to string. So this will probably print it out in a nice format. And you can also join all the elements in this array with some kind of, with a certain pattern. So this will be 1, 2, 3. You can also remove the last element using pop. You can add a element to the array using push. You can remove the first element using shift, and you can add an element as the first element using unshift. Wait, actually. Yeah. So that's about it for the basic stuff. We should also cover functions. So there are multiple ways to define functions in JavaScript, and unlike Python, which only has one form of function, which is def func. Okay, yes. There's only one form of function in Python. I mean, in JavaScript. Wait, yeah, in Python, but there are multiple forms in JavaScript. So basically, okay, one of the common ways to create a function is this. Also, you can add multiple arguments in console.log, and all the arguments will be space separated. So basically, this format creates a function called say hello, and it's actually a variable, and it's assigned to this anonymous function that accepts a name argument. So we can run say hello, and this should print out hello John. So we can also name this function. So this way we can also do greet John, I believe, but it's usually not necessary, and anything that's not necessary is not encouraged. So I should probably not do this. So I think you can also do probably. Let's try this out in Node. Yeah, you can also just declare a function that way. But this type of function declaration is often seen because in when you're creating objects, you will need to use this form of declaration. So let's see. Also, and just like how we use, okay, so if we change this var to a let, this will also be restricted to the block. So if we put this inside a block, we cannot access this function elsewhere. So it's just a side note. I think, yeah, that should be it. So right now I'm gonna let Eric take over, and he is going to explain objects for you.
Okay, so I'm gonna start share screen. So this is the demo that we had from last week or 2 weeks ago, sorry. The HTML and CSS. If you don't know where to find all of this stuff, you can go to our GitHub or github.com and then search for WHS ComSci Club. And then you want to go to users to find our user, and then just the lessons. And then go to SMS lessons. Second. All right, so then you can find all of the lessons right ordered by weeks, week 1, 2, and 7. So that's where I grabbed the index.html and style.css that we're seeing here. I'm going to be editing in here. So this is the index.html style.css, and I'm running the Python server. So it's on localhost 8080. So basically, I'm going to cover some basic JavaScript things that we can do with like a static website, but mainly in just also JavaScript like stuff in general. So basically, we're going to be first going over what objects are. So I'm going to create an example object. And then there's a couple ways you can do this. You can have it like this with the 2 brackets and then create your object stuff in here. But it doesn't look as nice. So Normally I put it like this. And then inside your object, you can have properties and values, right? So this is a property, and the property has a value of a string odd value. Or we can have another property, property one, and we can give this, oops, property one, and we can give that the value of two, right, which is a number. And you add another comma, and you can keep on going, and you can add like as many properties and values to your object. So we're gonna kind of make this like a person. So we're gonna give them a first name. Actually, I won't use an underscore first name, and the first name could be Bob, and they also have a last name. Bob's last name will be Joe, and then their age is gonna be 13. We can give them an email too. Uh, bobjoe123@gmail.com. And then lastly, actually, I think that's it. And then, so that's all of the stuff we're gonna give for this object called example object. And so I can console log the whole object itself, and we can see how that's gonna look. So if I save the file and then go back to right the website or the web page and I reload, you won't see any of the stuff because you have to go to the console. Easiest way is to press F12 or function F12 or something. Uh, Not sure why it didn't log out. Oh, I think actually I do know. So apologies. But we didn't teach this last time, but you have to link your main.js or your JavaScript file into your index.html. So what I mean by that is like right now, the index.html doesn't know, right, that hey, I need to be, looking at this stuff. So what we're gonna do is in the head, we can add a script and we can give it the source to whatever our file name is called. Ours is called main.js. And then we can just close it. And now I believe it should hopefully work. All right, so if we reload now, we can see this is our console, right? I'm in console. And then this is the example object. So it gives us all of this stuff, all of this blah, blah, blah. So it's pretty interesting. But that's not too useful to us. Most likely we want to like grab specific stuff from the example object. So here we can grab the age. So we can do example object dot age. If we reload, it gives you 13. And there's a bunch of different ways to actually grab like the property and the value. So each time you want to reference the property name, so I can actually grab it like this too, kind of like an array. So we give two brackets, brackets, and then inside you want to put the property, so we can put email. And if I go back and I reload, the email gets put out too. It's important to put that you have these quotation marks around email because otherwise it would think that email is a variable. So what I mean is like you can create like a const or a variable or whatever called temp, and we can give this equal to last name, and then we can also console log this. We can do example object of temp, right? And we don't need quotation marks, and it's gonna give us the last name, so it gives us show. And so that's some basic object stuff. So I'm actually gonna comment all of this out because just to save like console space to make it look neater. And then we're gonna have a function now. So we're gonna like basically add a function into our object. So we're gonna call it example function. Make sure you put a comma behind here. So it's called example function, and it's the same format. This is your property technically, and I'm going to create a function call with a parentheses, and then curly braces, and inside the curly braces we can put our function. So we can return something, right? Because a function has to give a return value, and we can return something like hi, this is a function, and then we can reference one of these values, right? So we can give an and then we can use the this keyword. I don't think we talked about this keyword before, but it's used in like Java and JavaScript. It references the object, so it references like example object. It's kind of confusing to explain. We're running short on time, so just know that this dot property is going to give you the value of value. It's going to output value here. So we can console log this like function basically. So you can do example object dot example function. If we do this right here, it's not going to work because a function example function is a function, right? So we need to add the parentheses, right, to tell, JavaScript that, hey, this is a function call, not because otherwise, if we didn't have these, it just output this stuff here. So I can show what I mean by that. So if we didn't have it, it just outputs the whole function itself, which we don't want. So if we add the parentheses, it's going to give us the return value, which is hi, this is a function, and it gives us the value, which we had. Oh, didn't mean to open that. Which we had from here, right? This dot property. And so that's all for objects. Oh, actually, there's a lot more. Oops. So now we're gonna loop through an object. So we can use a for loop to loop through. So for, and then the format is variable in object, and then you can, and then do something. So basically, that's the format. So the variable we can just call temp var in, and an object is called example object. Let me comment this up. And then we can console log temp var, but it's not going to work because that's console logging like the property values. Uh, and we don't want that. What we instead want is we want the values themselves. So we're just going to do example object brackets temp var. And I'm going to comment this out too. So it loops through, gives us everything. And you see, we don't get the actual function call, right? We don't get the return value. And that's because we don't have the parentheses there. And yeah, there is a couple ways you can fix that, but we're not going to get into it. So just know that that's like one kind of flaw, quote unquote, of when you loop through and you have functions in there. We might talk about how we can like circumvent that later on. But I'm going to quickly finish objects. So one more thing we can do is we can turn your object into an array. Um, I'm not too sure why you would do this. There are reasons, but just use object dot values and then call the object itself. Basically, this just gives you an array now. So we can console log the array. And then so now we have an array, right? We can tell this array has a length of 7. It has the indexes or indices, so it is an array. And so that's all for objects. I still have a couple minutes, so I'll quickly go through constructors, and then we'll save everything that we don't get to for next week. So a constructor is similar to an object, but you can think of it as like a blueprint for an object. So it's not like a specific object, right? This is a specific object. A constructor, we're gonna create a person constructor because that's what we're dealing with. So it's gonna be called person. Inside of parentheses, we're gonna add parameters. So we're gonna take first, last, and age. That stands for first name, last name, and their age. And then we're gonna set different values to the parameters that we just got. So this, we're gonna use a this dot keyword, the this keyword again. So you're gonna call this dot first name equal to first, this dot last name equal to last, and this dot age equal to age. And there isn't any specific place where I'm getting first name, last name, or age from. I could like put first name 1, 2, 3, and it still work. That's just the property, right? So that's what the property is called. Ours is called first name, last name, and age. And then we can also do something pretty cool, right? We can use if statements inside your function. So you can do if age is less than 16, and then this dot drive is equal to false, right? Because you can't like drive until you're like 16, I think. I'm pretty sure that's right. Hopefully that's right. And then if age is equal to greater than or equal to 16, we can put this dot drive equal to true, right? So this dot drive or drive is going to be a Boolean. And then we can also put function or methods, inside functions or constructors. But basically, we'll go over a simple one. So this dot get name, and then we're gonna give it the equal sign, and then we're gonna basically make this a function. So we can return the value of this dot first name plus a space plus this dot last name, right? Which is the person's name. And then so now that we've finished with this, you can't just like console log person. Nothing's gonna like actually happen. Instead, you have to create a person, or you have to create an object based off your constructor. You can think about it that way. So we can call var Bobby, right? So that's our person. It's gonna be equal to a new person. Make sure you invoke the new keyword, and then now we have to add the parameters. Bobby's first name is obviously Bobby. We'll capitalize it. Last name is gonna be Joey, and then Bobby's age is gonna be 15, right? So they can't drive yet. And then after creating Bobby, we can do a couple things. We can console log Bobby, and it's gonna give us all of this information. Then we can console log Bobby.getName, and make sure you add your parentheses because it's a function or a method. All right, so this is when we console log Bobby, right? So it gives us all of the properties, values of Bobby. Age is 15, drive is false, right? Because it's under 16. First name is Bobby, get name's a function, it's okay. Last name is Joey. And then when we called the last name function, it gave us the first name plus a space plus the last name. And the last thing I'm going to show you before we finish, yeah, sorry we were a tiny bit over time, but we're going to create a method that can set the name, or like that's not just returning a value basically. So this dot change first name is going to be equal to a function, and we're going to take in a parameter this time, and we're going to take in a parameter called first new name, right? So the new, actually that makes no sense. We're going to call it new first name, right? Because it's the new first name. And then this time we're not going to return anything. We are just going to set this dot first name equal to new first name. No need for semicolon. I tend to not use semicolons. Uh, sorry if that's bad practice. So we can do Bobby dot change first name, and then inside the parentheses, the parameter, right, for new first name, we can call it Alice. So they changed her name to Alice or something. Might have been a bad example, but it is what it is. And then we can console log Bobby dot get name again, and this time it should show Alice Joey instead of Bobby Joey if we did everything right. So yeah, so the you can see that this dot change first name worked, right? Because their first name's now Alice instead of Bobby. And so I think that's all we're gonna cover today. So if you guys can leave, we can see you guys in 2 weeks. If you have any questions, you guys can message in the chat right now. Um, Otherwise, we'll wait for a couple more minutes before ending the meeting. Okay, I think we're gonna end the meeting. So see you guys in 2 weeks.